Ramblings ones. This one comes from my time in Kazakhstan, where I'm going to focus on the trade in endangered species. Overall, the trade in wildlife is worth billions and billions of dollars a year, and in endangered species, that's almost $500 million every year. I'm going to focus on the Saker Falcon, also known as feathered cocaine, and will hopefully turn this into a two-part series when I get to Pakistan and look at how these birds are being used after they're taken from their home in Central Asia, with some saying that they're used to hunt other endangered and protected birds. This one sort of first came to me when I was reading the guidebook and came across the Saker Falconry Centre, and I was like, oh yeah, this is interesting, something a little bit different, sort of a private initiative looking to reconcile touristic interest in wildlife and nature and using these profits to sort of fund the rehabilitation of large birds and also reintroduce endangered species into the wild. Great. But sort of the more research I did, and definitely after I went there, it wasn't as it seemed at all. The centre is home to several hundred birds from 15 different species who are all sort of rescues and can't be reintroduced to the wild. But the big statement is that they breed and reintroduce the endangered Saker falcon. For some of you who may know something about falconry, you may know that these birds are incredibly prized and people will do almost anything to get their hands on them. But for those of you who don't, I'll sort of fill you in on how the trade in this species and how prized they are has dragged the population in Kazakhstan down to several hundred pairs. Falconry is the traditional activity of keeping and training falcons and other raptors to sort of take quarry in their natural state. And this has actually been added to the UNESCO sort of World Heritage activities. And traditionally these birds were mainly used to hunt and were a massive part of the cultural identity of the Central Asian and Arabic people for centuries and centuries, with Genghis Khan supposed to have kept 800 falcons with 800 men to look after them. And there's still a huge part of this identity today, with so many events in the World Nomad Games held in Tajikistan being based around this tight bond between man and bird. The late 80s and 90s saw a huge boom in demand, with people from the Middle East coming over to Central Asia and hunting these wild birds to bring them home, train and then to hunt with. This absolutely plummeted the population, with it now potentially being 10% of what it was in the Soviet Union times, and it's said that between 6,000 and 9,000 birds are smuggled illegally every year into the Middle East. This is a huge problem, and even the CITES legislation doesn't seem to be enough to prevent it, with often the best birds being sold for $1 million each, and often for tens of thousands a pop. Outrageous. And this is sort of reminiscent of many trades in endangered species, but sort of like ivory, but for this one, they're kept alive. The Saker Falconry Centre, I imagined, offered a lifeline for these birds, but after having a conversation with Paul, the leading ornithologist there, I realised this wasn't the case at all, and that in fact they're sort of run as a business, selling 30% of these birds that are bred here legally every year, and the other 70% they release into the wild. I question that surely 70% releasing that much does help to supplement the population at some point, but I was swiftly corrected, and that these captive-born birds, although on paper should be able to survive in the wild due to their sort of isolation being brought up, they are no match for the wild birds and often just don't survive. And even if they do survive, there are no management practices put in place anyway to sort of protect them from the poachers and to protect their nesting sites, which are becoming more and more scarce. My second query is about the legal trade, and surely that makes it really difficult to sort of discern between the trade in what are legal birds and then what are illegal birds. And some would argue that maybe having legal birds sort of reduces the demand for illegal ones, but no. Apparently, because the wild ones are sort of so much more raw and natural, that the people who train them and hunt with them prefer these so much more. And that's a massive problem too. And even the strict CITES tagging initiatives, which basically mean that when you have a bird that's born, you tag it, and then the tag grows with it. So that means that you can sort of tell them apart, supposedly. But the money that's involved with this basically means that anything can be overcome, and that people will be willing to do whatever it takes to sort of keep this trade going. Just by commodifying these birds, we'll be driving their extinction in the wild. And this will be incredibly sad that sort of human greed and drive for social status along with this eventually leads to the decimation of a population of species. It's a really sad one, and the trade in endangered species anyway is such a tough topic. but it has to be stopped, and CITES are generally doing a very good job with this. But this is a little introduction for now onto the sort of the basics of this trade, and I'm really looking forward to getting to Pakistan in several months' time, sort of investigate this in a little bit more detail. Ramblings out.